She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just closed the door quietly. And walked away from everything. Her mate. Her best friend. 2 years of her life. Gone. In one single glance. No confrontation. No tears. No begging. Just a woman who finally saw the truth. And chose herself instead. But here's what nobody ever tells you about rock bottom. Sometimes. The most powerful man in the territory. Is waiting for you there. His name is Alexander Mercer. Alpha King. The most powerful man in the territory. A man whose stillness makes entire rooms go quiet. And on the worst night of her life. On a cold October street. With nothing but the clothes on her back. She saved him. A nobody in turn. Saved the most powerful alpha in existence. And once Alexander Mercer sees her. Really sees her. He doesn't let go. Ever. This is Scarlett's story. A story of betrayal that broke her open. And a love that walked through every crack. And it starts. Right now. The glass in her hand was still cold. That was the detail she would remember later, not the music, not the crowd pressing warm and loud around her, not the chandelier throwing fractured gold light across the ballroom floor. Just the cold of the glass against her palm. The way it grounded her. The way she held it like it was the only real thing in the room. She had learned early how to stand in a crowd and disappear. How to smile at the right moment, nod at the right pause, laugh just half a beat after everyone else so it never drew attention. It was a skill nobody taught her. She had built it herself, quietly, the way you build anything meant to survive, without anyone watching. The quarterly gala for Mercer and Associates filled the rooftop venue on the 14th floor. Floor-to-ceiling glass on 3 sides. The city below them glittering like something that didn't know it was cold. 200 people in their finest, moving through the space like they owned it, or wanted to. She stood near the far edge of the room, close enough to the open balcony door that the October air reached her. Cool. Clean. A relief against the perfume-thick warmth of the ballroom. Her dress was dark green, not because she loved the color but because it photographed well at events and nobody ever remembered the woman in green. That was the point. She was 3 months into her internship at Mercer and Associates. Assistant to the communications team. The kind of role where you learned everything and were credited for nothing. She had taken it because the access was worth the invisibility. She told herself that often enough that it almost felt true. Her glass was almost empty when she noticed the coat check line had thinned. She set her drink on the nearest tray and moved. Not toward anyone. Just away from the center of the room, toward the quieter corridor that ran alongside the main hall. The noise dropped the moment she stepped out of the ballroom. Carpet underfoot. Softer light. The distant sound of someone laughing too hard at something that wasn't funny. She was reaching for her phone when the scent hit her. She knew that scent. Had known it for 2 years. Warm cedar and something underneath it, something that had always felt like safety. Her body recognized it before her mind caught up, a quiet pull in her chest, the automatic ease of something familiar. She followed it without deciding to. The corridor curved left toward the private event rooms. The doors were all closed except one, the last one, left open just enough. A slice of warm light fell across the carpet. She heard fabric. A soft sound. A voice she knew even better than the scent. She won't be back for another hour. She never leaves early. Her hand was on the door before she understood why she had stopped breathing. She pushed it open. The room was small. A side lounge, unused for the evening. 2 chairs. A low table. A window overlooking the east side of the city. And them. Her mate, the man she had built a life beside for 2 years, whose cedar scent she had mistaken for safety, whose hand she had held through every quiet and hard thing, standing with his arms around a woman whose perfume Scarlett had borrowed so many times she no longer noticed it on her own skin. Her best friend. Neither of them heard the door. She stood there for 3 full seconds. Long enough to see clearly. Long enough that there was no version of this she could misread or talk herself out of. Long enough that the cold of the glass she'd set down a hallway ago was still in her palm, that phantom chill, the last sensation from the life she had been living 60 seconds ago. Then she stepped back. She pulled the door closed quietly. Not a slam. Not a word. Just a soft, definitive click. She walked back down the corridor, through the noise of the ballroom without stopping, past the coat check, into the elevator, down 14 floors, and out through the lobby doors into the October air. She didn't cry. She didn't look back. She just walked, and somewhere in the city behind her, without a sound, the life she had been living closed like a door nobody remembered to lock. The cold followed her. In the ballroom above, no one noticed she was gone. The city at night had a particular kind of indifference. It didn't care that she was walking without direction. It didn't slow down for her. Cabs moved through intersections, a group of men laughed outside a bar 2 blocks up, a food cart vendor folded his umbrella with the practiced efficiency of someone who had done it 1,000 times. The city exhaled around her and kept moving, and somehow that was easier than any comfort anyone could have offered. Scarlett walked. She had left her coat upstairs. She registered the cold the way you register background noise, present, acknowledged, filed away. Her heels were wrong for pavement, but she didn't stop to take them off. Stopping felt dangerous. Like if she stood still long enough, the thing she was carrying would catch up to her, and she wasn't ready for that yet. 2 years. She didn't let herself finish the thought. The street she turned onto was quieter. Less lit. The kind of block that existed between the bright parts of a city, a parking structure on one side, a row of closed storefronts on the other, a narrow service alley running parallel to the building line. She had walked this route before, the long way back from the office on late nights when she needed the air. She knew it without thinking about it. That was the only reason she noticed the car. A black sedan, pulled halfway onto the curb in front of the parking structure entrance. Engine running. No hazards. The driver's side door was open, which was wrong, not slightly wrong, wrong in the specific way that made the back of her neck tighten. She slowed without deciding to. A man was slumped against the front tire. Not drunk. The angle was wrong for drunk. His legs were straight, one arm braced against the wheel well, his head dropped forward in a way that suggested the body trying to stay conscious through something it wasn't winning against. He was in a suit. Dark, well-cut, the kind that didn't come off a rack. No tie. Top button open. A phone on the ground 2 feet away from his hand, screen cracked, still lit. She stopped. Every reasonable instinct said keep walking. This was the city. This was nighttime. She was a woman alone on a poorly lit block in heels that weren't made for running. She crossed the sidewalk and crouched beside him. Up close, his breathing was shallow and uneven. His skin was pale in the way that had a reason behind it. Her eyes moved fast, no visible injury, no smell of alcohol, but his left hand was pressed flat against the pavement and trembling with the effort of it. Micro-tremors. She had seen that once before, in a first aid course she had taken 2 years ago that everyone in the office called unnecessary. She had taken it anyway. She pressed 2 fingers to the inside of his wrist. His pulse was there. Rapid, unsteady, skipping in a pattern she recognized from a laminated card she had studied longer than anyone expected her to. Vasovagal. Possibly. Or something cardiac she couldn't rule out. She picked up his phone and dialed emergency services before she looked at his face. When she did look, really looked, something shifted in her chest that had nothing to do with recognition. She didn't know him. But her body responded to his proximity the way it responded to very few things, with a clarity that cut through everything else she was feeling. The grief she had been carrying since that corridor upstairs went quiet. Not gone. Just quiet. Pressed to the edges by something more immediate. His scent reached her then. Not cedar. Nothing like cedar. This was something cooler, clean water over dark stone, the kind of air that exists just before a storm breaks, when everything goes still and sharp and the atmosphere holds its breath. It moved through her like a key turning in a lock she hadn't known existed. She kept her fingers on his pulse and stayed very still. His eyes opened. Dark. Direct. Focused on her face with an intensity that shouldn't have been possible for someone whose body was fighting to stay upright. Not confused. Not afraid. Just looking. Like he was solving something. The emergency dispatcher answered in her ear. She gave the location clearly, calmly, without looking away from him. His lips moved. You stayed. Not a question. Her pulse answered before she did. And somewhere in the space between his exhale and hers, the October air stopped feeling cold. The ambulance arrived in 4 minutes. She knew because she counted. Not deliberately, her mind simply did that, measured intervals, cataloged details, filed information in the quiet methodical way it had always worked. A habit that had never served her at dinner parties or pack gatherings but had kept her functional through every difficult thing life had handed her without warning. She stayed crouched beside him until the paramedics came around the corner of the parking structure, and then she stood, stepped back, and gave them room. Clean and automatic. No drama. She answered their questions, pulse rate, estimated time of onset, position when found, and they looked at her with the particular attention people gave someone who knew more than they expected. He watched her from the ground the entire time. She felt it. That gaze. It had a specific quality. Not invasive, not aggressive, but present in the way very few people managed. Most people looked at things. He looked into them. She kept her eyes on the paramedics and pretended not to notice. They stabilized him quickly. His blood pressure had dropped, dehydration compounded by what one paramedic quietly noted as an unmanaged stress response. Not cardiac. Her assessment had been close enough. She filed that away without satisfaction. When they moved to transfer him to the stretcher he spoke, low, unhurried, the voice of someone accustomed to being listened to the first time. I don't need the hospital. Sir. My physician will meet me at this address. He said a street number. The paramedic hesitated. He said it again, the same tone, and something in the delivery made the hesitation end. Scarlett reached down and picked up his cracked phone from the pavement. She held it out without comment. He took it. Their fingers didn't touch. But the air between her hand and his contracted in a way she felt in her back teeth. Your name, he said. Not, what's your name? Not a question structured with the usual social grace. Just the words, direct, like he was accustomed to asking for things once. It doesn't matter, she said. Something moved across his face. Not offense. Closer to interest. The kind of expression that appeared when a person encountered something they hadn't anticipated and found it worth examining. It does to me, he said. She held his gaze for one measured second. Then she looked away, toward the paramedic filling out a report on a tablet. Is he clear to be transported by private vehicle? The paramedic looked between them. If someone responsible is with him. She stays, Alexander said. The words fell into the air with a weight that had no business being there. She turned back to him slowly. You don't know me, she said. No, he agreed. But you knew what to do. It wasn't flattery. She would have recognized flattery, she had been navigating it and dismissing it for years. This was something else. An observation delivered with the same precision he'd used to give the paramedic his address. Clean. Certain. Like a fact he had already verified. She should have said no. She had somewhere to be, except she didn't, not anymore, because the place she would have gone back to an hour ago no longer existed in any form that made sense to return to. She got in the car. The driver. A composed man in his 50s who greeted Alexander with the relief of someone who had been circling the block in controlled panic, pulled into traffic without a word about the broken schedule or the stranger in the back seat. Scarlett sat with 6 inches of space between herself and the man she had pulled off a pavement 20 minutes ago. The car was warm. Leather and something faintly botanical, whatever the interior had been cleaned with. Underneath it, just barely, that scent again. Cool water. Dark stone. The held breath before a storm. She looked straight ahead. Scarlett, she said quietly. He said nothing for a moment. Alexander. She nodded once. Neither of them elaborated. The city moved past the windows and the silence between them arranged itself into something that wasn't uncomfortable, which was, in itself, deeply uncomfortable. Her hands were still in her lap. They weren't shaking. That surprised her more than anything else that had happened tonight. But when his shoulder shifted 1 inch closer to hers in the dark of the car, her breath caught, and she hated that he probably heard it. The building Alexander was taken to didn't announce itself. No logo above the entrance. No uniformed doorman performing welcome. Just a limestone facade on a quiet street, a single light above a black door, and a woman in a gray suit already standing on the steps when the car pulled up, phone in hand, expression controlled in the way that suggested the control was costing her something. Scarlett recognized the posture. She had worn it herself often enough. The woman's eyes moved to Scarlett the moment she stepped out of the car. A single sweep, practiced, thorough, filed. Then she turned to Alexander and began speaking in a low, clipped tone about calls that needed returning and a board member who had been asking questions since 8 o'clock. Alexander listened without responding until she finished. Clear my morning, he said. Sir, the Harmon account. Clear it. The woman's mouth closed. She nodded once and stepped aside. Inside, the building was exactly what the exterior had refused to promise. Clean lines. High ceilings. The kind of quiet that didn't happen by accident. It was built in, engineered into the walls and the floors and the particular weight of the air. A physician was already waiting in a room off the main hall, a compact man with careful hands who greeted Alexander without ceremony and directed him to sit. Scarlett stopped in the doorway. She had no reason to go further. She had done what needed doing. The ambulance had been called, the information relayed, the car ride completed. Whatever came next belonged to people who were paid to manage it, and she was not one of them. She turned to leave. The couch, Alexander said, from across the room. His jacket was off. The physician was wrapping a blood pressure cuff around his arm. He hadn't looked up. She turned back. Excuse me? There's a couch in the hall. Sit. I'm not your employee. Now he looked up. That direct gaze again, not sharp, not unkind, simply certain in a way that most people never managed even when they were trying. No, he said. You're not. But you're not leaving either. She should have argued. The reasonable response was to argue, to point out that she owed him nothing beyond what she had already given, that she had a life to get back to, that this entire situation was beyond any boundary she had agreed to cross. Except she had no life to get back to. That thought moved through her cleanly, without the devastation she expected. Like a door she had already closed, the click of it still fresh in her memory. Cedar and betrayal and a room she had walked away from without a word. She sat on the couch in the hall. The physician's visit took 40 minutes. She knew because the clock on the wall across from her was the old-fashioned kind, a white face with black hands that moved in real, audible increments. She listened to it and kept her mind deliberately empty, which was harder than it sounded and easier than thinking about the alternative. The woman in the gray suit reappeared twice. Both times she glanced at Scarlett with an expression that had moved from assessment to something more guarded. Not hostile. Cautious, the way people were cautious around things they hadn't categorized yet. When Alexander emerged from the examination room, he was moving normally, measured, upright, the physical authority of him restored to something that made it hard to believe he had been slumped against a tire 45 minutes ago. He stopped in front of her. She stood. He was taller than she had registered on the ground. Or the context made it more apparent, here, in his own space, with the architecture of the building arranged around him like it understood who was in charge. You should eat something, he said. I'm fine. You've been running on cold air and shock for the last hour. She opened her mouth. Closed it. Because he wasn't wrong, and she disliked that he had read that accurately without her offering it. There's a kitchen through there, he said. I'll have someone. I can find it myself. A pause. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile. Something more restrained than that. I know you can, he said quietly. She walked toward the kitchen and told herself the warmth at the back of her neck was just the building's heating system. She almost believed it. The kitchen was at the end of a short hallway, behind a door that opened onto something unexpectedly human. Not a catered setup. Not a corporate kitchen built for appearances. A real one, worn wooden countertops, a window above the sink overlooking a narrow courtyard, a coffee maker that had been used enough to stain the carafe. A bowl of apples on the counter. The kind of room that existed because someone actually lived in this building, or close enough to it that the distinction had blurred. Scarlett stood inside the doorway for a moment. Then she moved to the sink, turned on the cold water, and pressed both wrists under the tap. It was something she had done since she was young, not dramatic, not a ritual, just a practical reset. Cold water on pulse points. It worked the way most quiet things worked, not by solving anything, but by bringing the body back to the present moment when the mind had started pulling in too many directions at once. She stood there until her breathing evened. Then she dried her hands, opened the refrigerator with the careful permission of someone in a stranger space, and found a container of leftover rice, half a lemon, and a block of cheese that had been wrapped with more care than she expected from a man who ran a corporation. She found a pan. She found salt. She didn't ask. She was plating the food when she heard him in the doorway. She didn't turn around. I made enough for two. A pause. You cook. I problem solve, she said. Cooking is just problem solving with a time constraint. She heard him move to the small table by the window, the scrape of a chair, the sound of him sitting with the careful deliberateness of someone whose body was still negotiating with them. She brought both plates and sat across from him without ceremony. They ate in silence for a moment. Outside the courtyard window, something dripped steadily from a gutter. The remnants of rain she hadn't noticed falling. The kitchen light was warm and slightly too yellow, and it made everything feel slower than it was. "You were at the Mercer Gala," he said. She looked up. "You were there?" "I was supposed to be." He set his fork down. "I left early." She absorbed that. "Why?" He considered the question with more weight than it probably deserved. "The same reason you did, I imagine." Her jaw tightened. "You don't know why I left?" "No," he said. "But you walked out of a company event without your coat on a 40-degree night, and you haven't mentioned going back." She looked at her plate. The thing she had been keeping at arm's length for the past 2 hours was closer now. The kitchen's warmth had softened her edges without her permission, and the silence was the wrong kind, too steady, too unhurried. It didn't push. That was the problem. She knew how to hold herself together against pressure. She had been doing it for years. She didn't know what to do with gentleness. "I found my mate," she said. Her voice came out level. "With my best friend. Tonight. At the gala." She hadn't planned to say it. The words arrived before the decision to speak them did. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. "How long?" he asked. 2 years. "The mating." She paused. "I don't know how long the other thing." "That's the part that stays," he said quietly. "Not knowing." She looked up at him then, really looked, the way she hadn't allowed herself to since the parking structure. There was something in his expression she hadn't expected. Not pity. Not the careful sympathy people performed when they didn't know what else to offer. Recognition. The kind that lived behind the eyes of someone who understood a specific type of wound, not because they had read about it, but because they carried a version of it themselves. She didn't ask. It wasn't her place, and she could feel the boundary of it. But the scent of him shifted, just barely. The cool water and dark stone deepened into something warmer underneath. Something that hadn't been there before. Her chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with grief. "I should go," she said. He didn't argue. But his eyes stayed on her face for 3 seconds longer than necessary. And the scent of him followed her all the way to the door. She didn't go far. That was the truth she wouldn't examine too closely, that when she stepped out of Alexander's building into the October night, she walked exactly 4 blocks before she stopped moving. Not because she was tired. Not because her heels had finally made their argument impossible to ignore. But because the city spread out around her in every direction and she had no coordinate to move toward. The life she had been navigating for 2 years. The apartment she shared with her mate, the routines built around his schedule, the best friend she had called at midnight when things were hard, all of it had been standing on ground that turned out to be borrowed. And now she was standing on a street corner at 11:15 on a Thursday night with no coat, and the only warm thing she had encountered in the last 3 hours was a kitchen that didn't belong to her. She found a hotel 4 blocks from Alexander's building. Small. Clean. The kind of place that asked no questions as long as the card cleared. She paid for 1 night because 1 night was all she could think that far ahead. The room was on the 3rd floor. A window overlooking the street. A bed with white sheets and too many pillows. She sat on the edge of it and finally, let herself be still. The grief arrived quietly. Not in waves the way people described it. More like pressure. A slow, steady weight settling into her chest, her throat, the spaces behind her eyes. 2 years. She had built something she believed in, and the foundation had been wrong the whole time, and the worst part wasn't the betrayal. The worst part was that she hadn't seen it. She was observant. It was the thing she prided herself on, the quiet skill that had kept her functional through every environment that tried to make her invisible. She noticed things. She catalogued details. She read rooms before she entered them. And she had missed this completely. That was what sat heaviest. Not the loss of him, that wound was clean, or would be. But the gap in her own perception. The blind spot she hadn't known existed. She lay back on the bed without changing her clothes and stared at the ceiling. His scent was still on her. Not her ex-mate cedar, that was gone, scrubbed away by cold air and distance and the particular finality of a door closing. This was Alexander's scent. Cool water and dark stone and that warmer undercurrent she had noticed in the kitchen when his expression had shifted into something human and unguarded. It had transferred somehow, from the car, from the proximity of the kitchen table, from air shared in a small space over a quiet meal. She should have found it intrusive. She didn't. She pressed the back of her hand to her sternum and felt her own heartbeat, steadier than it had any right to be. Her mind moved back through the evening in careful sequence. The ballroom. The corridor. The door she had opened and closed without a word. The street. The man against the tire. His pulse under her fingers, rapid and skipping. The way he had looked at her from the ground, not through her, the way most people did, but at her. With the full weight of his attention, like she was worth the effort of seeing clearly. You knew what to do. 3 words. Delivered without decoration. And somehow they had moved through her differently than 2 years of being told she was loved. She closed her eyes. She wasn't ready to understand that yet. She filed it carefully, the way she filed everything that mattered, not dismissed, not examined, just held in the part of her mind that worked on things slowly and returned with answers when she wasn't expecting them. Sleep came faster than she expected. And just before it took her completely, in that soft, unguarded space between waking and under, she thought she heard rain beginning against the window. Real rain this time. The kind that changed the smell of everything. Washed the streets clean of whatever the day had left behind. She exhaled. Somewhere across 4 city blocks, in a building that didn't announce itself, a man sat in a dark office and looked at a cracked phone screen, at the address he had called the paramedic from. He hadn't deleted it. She returned to work on Monday. Not because she was ready. Because readiness was a luxury she had never been able to afford, and the alternative, staying still long enough for everything she was carrying to fully land, was not something she was prepared to face in a hotel room with white sheets and too many pillows. She had spent the weekend in careful motion. A new apartment secured by Saturday afternoon. A small one, 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from the office, the kind of place that asked nothing of her emotionally because it had no history yet. She had retrieved her belongings from the shared apartment on Sunday morning, arriving at 9 when she knew he would be at training. She took only what was hers. Left no note. The absence of a confrontation was its own kind of statement. Mercer and Associates occupied floors 11 through 15 of a glass building in the financial district. The communications team sat on 12, open plan, good light, the particular energy of people who moved fast and talked faster. Scarlett arrived 7 minutes early, which was her habit, and settled at her desk with the practiced composure of someone who had learned to separate their interior life from their visible surface. Nobody mentioned the gala. That surprised her for exactly 30 seconds before it didn't. She was an intern. She had left an event early. In the hierarchy of things worth noticing, that registered somewhere below the catering complaint and above nothing. She was 3 hours into a media monitoring report when the floor changed. She felt it before she understood it, a shift in the air pressure of the room, subtle as a barometric drop before weather. Conversations that had been running at full volume stepped down a register. Movement near the elevator banks slowed. The particular alertness that moved through a pack when rank entered a space. She kept her eyes on her screen. Footsteps. Measured. Unhurried. The kind that didn't adjust their pace for the room because the room adjusted for them. They stopped. Scarlett. Her name in his voice was different from how it had sounded in the car. Quieter in volume, somehow larger in presence. She looked up with the same composure she had been maintaining since Monday morning and found Alexander standing at the edge of the communications floor with the woman in the gray suit, whose name, she now knew, was Diana, 2 steps behind him. He looked exactly as he had in the building. Dark suit, no tie, top button open. Nothing about him performed authority. It simply existed, the way gravity existed, not announced, just present and non-negotiable. "Sir," she said. Something moved through his expression at the word. Barely perceptible. "Walk with me." Diana's eyes cut to Scarlett with an expression she couldn't fully read, not hostile, not warm. Measuring. Scarlett saved her document, pushed back her chair, and followed him without asking where. He led her to a conference room at the end of the floor, glass walls, currently unoccupied, the blinds angled for privacy without being fully closed. He held the door. She walked through. "How are you?" he said. Not a performance of concern. The same directness he applied to everything. "Functional," she said. "That's not what I asked." She looked at him steadily. "It's what I have." He accepted that without pushing. She had noticed that about him. He didn't press past the boundary he could see. Most people, when they asked how you were, wanted a specific answer. He seemed to want only the true one, whatever shape it came in. "I want to offer you a position," he said. "On my personal communications team. Based on 15. The 15th floor. His floor. The one nobody on 12 talked about casually. Why, she said. Because you're observant. You're calm under pressure. And you don't perform competence, you just have it. You spent 40 minutes with me. I spent 40 minutes watching how you move through a situation that would have paralyzed most people, he said. That's enough. She was quiet for a moment. Outside the glass walls, she could see the communications floor continuing its business. She could also see, across the open plan, near the elevator bank, her ex-mate, Ryan, badge clipped to his jacket, staring at the conference room with an expression she recognized. Confusion sharpening into something uglier. I'll think about it, she said. Alexander followed her gaze through the glass. Then back to her face. Take your time, he said quietly, and somehow it sounded like the opposite of goodbye, asterisk. She took exactly 24 hours. Not because she was uncertain. The decision had assembled itself with quiet efficiency somewhere between leaving the conference room and reaching her desk. She had felt it settle, clean and complete, the way decisions did when they were right rather than convenient. The 24 hours were for a different reason. She needed to understand what she was walking into. She spent Monday evening at her new kitchen table. A folding one she had picked up because it was functional and asked nothing of her aesthetically, with her laptop open and every publicly available piece of information about Alexander Mercer spread across her screen. Not the curated version on the company website. The actual record. What she found didn't surprise her. It confirmed what she had read in him directly, the precision, the discipline, the particular kind of intelligence that didn't announce itself. Mercer and Associates had been his father's company. He had taken the Alpha CEO position at 31, after a succession dispute that the financial press described in careful, diplomatic language that didn't fully conceal the brutality underneath. He had restructured the pack hierarchy within the corporation in the first year. Retention had gone up. Dissent had gone quiet. Not through fear, the profiles were careful to note. Through standards. She read until midnight. Then she closed the laptop and went to bed. Tuesday morning she arrived on floor 15 at 8:50. Diana was already there. The gray suit today was a deep navy. She looked at Scarlett with the same measured expression she had worn since the night of the gala, then gestured toward a desk positioned outside Alexander's office, clean, unoccupied, recently prepared. He said you'd come today, Diana said. He was right, Scarlett said, and sat down. The work was different on 15. Faster in some ways, quieter in others. The communications that passed through her hands carried actual weight, not the media monitoring reports of floor 12 but real correspondence, real decisions in early form, the kind of information that required discretion as a baseline rather than a reminder. She adapted without announcing it. Alexander appeared from his office at 10. He acknowledged her with a look, brief, direct, the full weight of his attention for exactly 3 seconds. And then moved into his morning without ceremony. She understood, then, what kind of working arrangement this was going to be. Not warm, not cold. Present. Precise. The kind of professional proximity that required both people to be exactly what they said they were, because there was no room on 15 for performance. She found she didn't mind that at all. The first week passed in careful rhythm. The second week, Ryan appeared on 15. She heard him before she saw him. His voice in the elevator corridor, the familiar cadence of it, the way he laughed at something that probably wasn't funny. She had known this was possible. Mercer and Associates was one company. The floors were not separate universes. She had prepared for it the way she prepared for most things, not by rehearsing a response but by deciding in advance that she would have won. She was standing at the printer when he rounded the corner. He stopped. She collected her documents, tapped them straight against the machine, and turned. Scarlett. His voice was different from her memory of it. Smaller, somehow. Or maybe she had changed the scale against which she measured things. Ryan, she said. He looked the way people looked when they had rehearsed a conversation and found the other person hadn't shown up to play their assigned role. Prepared for tears, maybe. For anger. For something he could navigate with the confidence of someone accustomed to being forgiven. I've been trying to reach you. I know, she said. We should talk. We don't need to. His jaw tightened. You can't just. Ryan. Alexander's voice came from the end of the corridor. Quiet. Absolute. The way a door closing quietly was still a door closing. Ryan turned. Something moved through his expression that Scarlett catalogued with detached clarity, the recognition of rank, the instinctive physical adjustment of a lower-ranked pack member in the presence of an alpha, the particular discomfort of a man who had been certain of his position discovering he had miscalculated it entirely. Alexander looked at Ryan for exactly 2 seconds. Then he looked at Scarlett. "I need those Harmon files when you have a moment," he said. "Of course," she said. She walked past Ryan without looking back. Behind her, she heard Ryan exhale, and in it, the first faint sound of a man beginning to understand the size of what he had thrown away. The Harmon files took 3 days to compile. Not because the work was complex, it was, but complexity had never slowed her down. It took 3 days because Alexander reviewed everything twice, and his standard for twice was most people's standard for 6 times, and she had decided without announcing it that she would meet that standard or exceed it. There was no middle position available on 15 that she was willing to occupy. She delivered the completed files on a Thursday evening when the floor had emptied. She knocked once and walked in. He was at the window, standing, not sitting, which she had learned meant he had been behind the desk too long and needed the change of position without being willing to leave the office. The city spread below him, lit and indifferent, the same city that had witnessed the worst night of her life 6 weeks ago and had kept moving without comment. She set the files on his desk. "Done," she said. He turned from the window. His eyes moved to the files, then to her face, and stayed there. "Sit down, Scarlett." "I'm fine standing." "I know you are," he said. "Sit down anyway." She sat. He moved to the desk but didn't sit behind it. He took the chair beside her instead, which reconfigured the geometry of the room in a way she noticed and didn't comment on. No desk between them. No hierarchy performed through furniture. "Diana told me you've been here before 7 every morning," he said. "The work requires it." "The work requires 8, he said. "You're here at 6:50. She looked at him steadily. "Is that a problem?" "It's a question." She was quiet for a moment. Outside the window the city moved through its Thursday evening, cabs and foot traffic and the particular amber light that settled over the financial district when the sun dropped behind the western buildings. "I sleep better when I'm moving towards something," she said finally. He absorbed that without filling the silence around it, which was one of the things she had catalogued about him in 6 weeks of close proximity. He didn't perform listening. He just did it. "The Harmon account goes to signature next week," he said. "I want you in the room." She looked up. The Harmon signing was not an intern event. It was not a Floor 15 junior staff event. It was the kind of room that held people who had spent years building toward it. "Why?" she said. "Because you caught 3 inconsistencies in the preliminary brief that 2 senior staff missed," he said. "And you flagged them in a footnote rather than making them a performance." She had flagged them in a footnote because making them a performance would have been inefficient and she hadn't thought anyone above her would read that far. He had read that far. "All right," she said. The word landed between them and the room went quiet in a particular way, not empty quiet, the other kind. The kind that had something in it. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Yes." "The night at the parking structure." She kept her voice even. "You were at the gala. You left early. You ended up alone on a side street with your driver circling the block." She paused. "Why were you alone?" He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might redirect the question. "Because I am, most of the time," he said. "By design." "Whose design?" "Mine." A pause. "It's cleaner." "Cleaner," she repeated. "People at this level want proximity to the position," he said. "Not to the person." She understood that. She understood it in the specific way you understood something you had lived adjacent to, the experience of being in a room full of people and being alone in it, of being known by your function rather than your substance. "That's a specific kind of lonely," she said quietly. He looked at her, and for the first time in 6 weeks, the full weight of his gaze landed without the professional frame around it. No assessment. No analysis. Just, looking. The way he had looked at her from the pavement. Like she was the only thing in the space worth the effort of seeing clearly. "Yes," he said. "It is." Her chest tightened. The city held its breath outside the window. His hand rested on the arm of the chair between them, still, not reaching, simply present. 3 inches from hers. She didn't move away. And in the silence that followed, something that had been waiting, patient and certain as a season changing, finally, quietly, began. The pack gathering was held in the Mercer Estate's ground floor. Not a ballroom, a great room, the kind that had been lived in long enough to carry the particular warmth of repeated use. Dark wood floors. High windows letting in the last of the April evening light. 30, maybe 35 people moving through the space with the easy familiarity of a pack that had learned to exist around one another without performance. Scarlett stood near the window with a glass of water. Not wine, not tonight, watching the room the way she always watched rooms. Cataloging. Measuring. The habit that had kept her functional through every environment that tried to make her invisible. She had been on 15 for 4 months now. 4 months of early mornings and honest silences and work that asked everything of her and gave back something she hadn't expected, the specific satisfaction of being exactly where her abilities were matched. She had stopped shrinking herself to fit the space. The space had simply become the right size. Alexander appeared beside her without announcement. That was his way. He didn't enter rooms, he arrived in them, the air shifting slightly in the seconds before he was fully present, like atmospheric pressure adjusting to accommodate something significant. You've been avoiding the center of the room, he said. I prefer the edges, she said. Better sight lines. I know, he said. I've noticed. She looked at him. He was watching the room, not her, but his attention was entirely on her, which was a distinction she had learned to read in him over 4 months of close proximity. The room moved around them. Conversations rose and fell. Someone laughed near the fireplace. I need to tell you something, he said. His voice was the same as always, measured, unhurried, the baseline certainty of a man who chose his words the way he chose everything else. With complete deliberateness. She waited. I am not good at this, he said. I want you to know that before I say it, so you understand it's not a performance. Alexander. I notice everything about you, he said quietly. The way you arrive before anyone else and leave after most. The way you flag problems in footnotes because you care more about the solution than the credit. The way you stood in my kitchen in a dress that cost more than my driver earns in a week and made rice because it was what was available and you needed to do something useful with your hands. She was very still. I notice the way you breathe differently when something has hurt you and you've decided not to show it. I notice that you haven't let anyone close since October and I understand why and I'm not asking you to change that. A pause. I'm asking you to consider letting me be the exception. The room continued around them. Nobody was watching. Or everyone was, she couldn't tell and it didn't matter. That's not a small thing you're asking, she said. No, he agreed. It isn't. I'll think about it. She said. He nodded once. No pressure. No performance of hurt. Just acceptance, clean and complete, the way he received everything she gave him on her own terms. That's enough, he said. She believed him. She was still holding that, the warmth of it, the unfamiliar safety of being asked rather than assumed, when Ryan appeared at her left shoulder. She smelled the alcohol before she heard him. Not drunk. Enough. Scarlett. His voice carried the particular confidence of a man who had rehearsed this. We need to finish our conversation. We don't, she said. You've been avoiding me for months. Ryan. She kept her voice level. This isn't the place. Then when? His hand moved toward her arm. The room shifted. Not loudly. Not with movement or raised voices. Just, shifted. The way a room shifted when the temperature changed without warning. Alexander turned. He looked at Ryan's hand. The one reaching for Scarlett's arm, and then at Ryan's face. His expression didn't change. His voice, when it came, was completely calm. She has told you twice, he said. In this pack, under this roof, that is the last time anyone speaks to what belongs to my heart without her permission. Silence. Complete. Absolute. Ryan's hand dropped. And every person in that room understood, without a single clarification, exactly where Scarlett stood, and exactly who stood beside her. The room stayed quiet for 3 full seconds. Then conversation resumed, carefully, gradually, the way water finds its level after something has disturbed it. People looked away with the practiced discretion of a pack that understood when a moment belonged only to the people inside it. Ryan left without another word. She heard his footsteps cross the dark wood floor, heard the quiet displacement of people stepping aside as he moved toward the exit, heard the door, and then nothing. Just the room continuing around her, softer now, rearranged. She didn't watch him go. She was looking at Alexander. He had already turned back to the window. His posture was the same as it had been before, unhurried, contained, the stillness of a man who had said what needed saying and released it completely. No performance of dominance. No survey of the room to measure its reaction. He had meant what he said and he was done with it. That was the thing about him she had never been able to dismiss. He meant everything. She turned back to the window too. They stood side by side in the amber light of the April evening, the city visible through the glass, the room warm behind them. Her glass of water was cool against her palm, the same cold anchor she had held in a ballroom 6 months ago, in a life that no longer existed in any form she recognized. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know," he said. "It wasn't a performance," she said. "Not a question." "No," he said. "It wasn't." She absorbed that. Outside the window, the last of the evening light was pulling away from the city, leaving the amber glow of street lamps and office buildings and the particular luminescence of a city that never went fully dark. "When I left that ballroom in October," she said quietly, "I thought I was walking away from everything. The life I had built. The person I thought I was inside it." She paused. "I didn't know I was walking toward something." "You weren't," he said. "You were walking toward yourself. I was just, nearby." She looked at him then. Fully. The way she had allowed herself to look at him only in careful increments over 4 months, never the full weight of her attention, always something held back, some portion of herself kept in reserve because reserve had been survival for so long she had forgotten it was a choice. She let it go now. He held her gaze with the same steadiness he brought to everything. Not waiting for a specific answer. Not performing patience. Just present. Completely, unreservedly present in the way that had undone her slowly and thoroughly over 4 months without either of them naming it. "I've been thinking," she said. "You said you would," he said. "I think about things carefully," she said. "You know that about me." "I do," he said. "It's one of the things he stopped. Reconsidered. It's one of the things." The almost sentence hung between them. She felt it, the shape of what he had pulled back, the warmth of it, the specific vulnerability of a man who had learned to hold himself at distance discovering he had run out of reasons to. "Alexander," she said. "Yes. I'm done thinking," she said. The words arrived without rehearsal, clean, direct, hers completely. Not given away. Not surrendered. Chosen. With the full weight of everything she had carried and set down and rebuilt in 6 months of early mornings and honest silences and footnotes that someone had actually read. Something shifted in his expression, not dramatically, not with the performance of relief or triumph. Just a quiet settling. Like a room after a window is finally opened. His hand moved to hers. Slowly. Completely present in every increment of the movement. Giving her every opportunity to reconsider, to redirect, to hold the reserve she had kept for so long. She didn't. His fingers closed around hers. Warm. Certain. The scent of him, cool water and dark stone and that deeper warmth underneath, moved through her like the first clean breath after a long time in a closed room. Her chest opened. Not broken. Not healed, exactly. Something more honest than healed. Whole. The room continued behind them. The city continued beyond the glass. The pack moved and talked and existed in the comfortable noise of belonging. She stood in the amber light with her hand in his. And for the first time in longer than she could name, she didn't disappear. She stayed. Completely, finally, irreversibly, she stayed. The gathering thinned slowly. People filtered out in the unhurried way of a pack that had nowhere urgent to be, coats retrieved, quiet goodnights exchanged, the particular ease of people who belonged to the same world moving back through it at their own pace. The great room emptied by degrees until the dark wood floors held only a few remaining conversations and the low warmth of lamps that had been lit against the evening. Scarlett hadn't moved from the window. Neither had Alexander. Their hands were still connected, not tightly, not desperately, the way people held on when they were afraid of losing something. Quietly. The way you held something you were certain of. Diana passed through on her way out. She glanced at their joined hands, then at Scarlett's face, and something in her careful expression finally released, not surprise, the opposite of surprise. The expression of someone who had been waiting for an outcome they had already seen coming and was satisfied to have their patience confirmed. She said nothing. Just nodded once, at Scarlett specifically, and left. The last guests filtered out. The room was theirs. Alexander turned from the window to face her fully. In the low lamplight his features carried none of the corporate precision of 15. Not the alpha CEO, not the pack leader, not the man whose name made rooms adjust themselves before he entered. Just him. The version she had seen in a kitchen at midnight, making room at a small table. The version that had sat beside her rather than across from her and asked real questions and listened to real answers. "I want to tell you something," she said. "Tell me," he said. She took a breath. Not for courage, she had made her decision and it was solid beneath her. For accuracy. Because she wanted to say it correctly. "Before October I was good at being invisible," she said. "I had made a skill of it. I thought it was protection." She paused. "You were the first person in a very long time who looked at me like visibility was the point. Like being seen was not a risk but a reasonable expectation." He was very still. "You made me want to take up space again," she said quietly. "I don't think you know how significant that is." The lamplight moved across his face. His jaw tightened, not with tension, with something that needed a moment to be carried. "Scarlett," he said. His voice was lower than usual. The professional frame completely gone. "The night I looked up from that pavement and found you there, calm, certain, 2 fingers on my wrist like you had every right to be exactly where you were," he stopped. "I had been the most alone I had ever been for 3 years. And in 40 seconds you made that feel like a correctable condition." She felt the words land, not in her chest, deeper. In the place she had kept sealed and defended and slowly, carefully reopened over 6 months without fully naming what she was doing. "Correctable," she repeated softly. "Completely," he said. He raised his free hand, slowly, with the same deliberateness he brought to everything, giving her the full measure of the movement, and touched her face. Just his fingertips. Against her cheekbone. Warm and certain and unhurried. She leaned into it. A fraction of an inch. Barely perceptible. But real, completely, irreversibly real, and they both felt the significance of it move through the air between them. "I'm not easy," she said. "I need you to know that. I'm particular and I work too early and I flag problems in footnotes and I don't say things until I'm certain of them." "I know," he said. The corner of his mouth moved. "I read your footnotes." She laughed. It arrived without warning, genuine, unguarded, the kind of laugh that only existed when every defensive layer had been set down. It changed her face completely. He watched it happen with an expression she had never seen on him before. Undone. Quietly, completely undone. He closed the distance. His lips met hers, unhurried, certain, the same quality he brought to every deliberate thing. Not urgent. Not desperate. Thorough. The kind of kiss that understood it had time because it was the first of many and not the last of anything. She kissed him back with everything she had stopped hiding. Outside the windows, the April city carried on. Indifferent, luminous, entirely unaware that somewhere in a room with dark wood floors and low lamplight, a woman who had learned to disappear had just decided, permanently and without reservation, to remain. There was no ceremony. No announcement. No formal declaration made in front of witnesses or pack elders or anyone who needed to know before they were ready to tell them. Just a Tuesday evening in early May when Alexander came home to find Scarlett asleep at her desk, her cheek resting on a stack of documents she had been reviewing, her long black hair fanned neatly across the papers, her breathing slow and even. He stood in the doorway for a long moment. Then he walked over, lifted her carefully without waking her, and carried her to the couch. He removed her shoes. Found the blanket she kept folded on the armchair, the one she pretended was for guests but always ended up wrapped around her own shoulders on late nights. He covered her with it. Then he sat on the floor beside the couch with his back against the cushions and his own files in his lap and worked quietly beside her while she slept. That was how their mating felt. Not dramatic. Not announced. Just present. Constant. The kind of devotion that didn't need an audience because it wasn't performing for one. He learned her coffee order and never asked twice. He noticed when she was carrying something heavy before she said a word and didn't push, just stayed close enough that she knew she didn't have to carry it alone. He read her footnotes. Every single one. And when she flagged something important he made sure the right people knew whose instinct had caught it. He never took credit for her work. He never made her feel small in a room. And on the nights when the ghost of October came back, quiet and uninvited, the way old wounds sometimes did, he didn't try to fix it. He just sat beside her in the dark and let her feel whatever she needed to feel until it passed. She started leaving things at his place without noticing. A spare charger. A coffee mug she didn't remember bringing over. A book face down on his nightstand with her notes in the margins. He never mentioned it. He just made room. That was how she knew. Not from anything he said. But from everything he quietly, deliberately, irreversibly made space for. Her. All of her. Without being asked.